life and death, breaking and building, weeping and dancing. These are the times, the seasons we've explored together thus far during Lent. And now we have come to one that's a little less straightforward. A time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. As I started my sermon prep this week, the embracing and refraining from embracing part made sense to me. Pretty clear on the surface. The throwing stones part kind of threw me for a loop. And to be honest, I was planning on just ignoring it, only talking about the second half of the verse. But my curiosity got the better of me. So whenever I come across something confusing like this, my standard practice is to go to a good commentary on that book of the Bible. Commentaries are these massive books, sometimes like literally this thick, on verse by verse, sometimes word by word breakdowns of the biblical text. So I found a couple of commentaries on Ecclesiastes. Thankfully, I had some ebook versions available. And I looked up this passage. And I discovered that I am not the only one who is confused about what is going on with this verse. Jewish rabbis have given a lot of commentary on this passage in Ecclesiastes. And there's kind of a consensus about every other verse except for this one. When we get to this one, there's a lot of different conclusions. So one of them suggests that throwing and gathering stones is a reference to demolishing a building and then gathering the pieces together for rebuilding elsewhere. Another one says, stick with me here, that it's about sex. So apparently, throwing and gathering stones was a euphemism at one point. And so the whole thing, throwing and gathering stones, embracing and refraining from embracing, maybe it's about sex. It's a little weird, I know. And there's a third rabbi who thinks it's about keeping stones in a bag to count with. And then there's a fourth who thinks it's about fields in wartime. Throwing stones ruins an enemy's field. Gathering stones restores the fields to usefulness. Nobody really knows what's happening with this verse. So I decided that I would do a little experiment to see if I could figure it out. I would throw some stones, and I would gather some stones, and I would see what happened. So on Thursday morning, I drove over to Giddings Park, which is about 2 miles east of here, right behind Christ Presbyterian Church. The park is at the bottom of a little hill, and it's hidden from the main road. And it's like literally the size of a cul-de-sac. So if you don't know that it's there, you would never, ever see it. But I went there because I knew there were a ton of rocks. Step one, throw some rocks. Ben, you want to put the first picture up there? So since Giddings Park is on the edge of Lake Mendota, I obviously had to see how many skips I could get of a rock. But when I got there, I hadn't really remembered fully that the lake would still be frozen. I don't know if you remember last week. It was kind of gross. And so you can see in the picture, like the front part of the lake is frozen, and then there's like an open stretch of water, and then there's more ice. And skipping rocks on a frozen lake is cool, but it doesn't really count if you're trying to like see how many skips you can get. I think it's cheating. And you can kind of tell in the picture, the ice is kind of melting, and so it's kind of bumpy, so the rocks just kept like flying in different directions. So eventually I gave up the skipping, and I just decided to throw some rocks, see how far I could throw rocks. Now again, if you look at the picture, there's that first stretch of ice, and then there's open water, and then there's another stretch of ice. And let's just say, for the sake of making me sound cool, that that second stretch of rock or ice was like 50 yards away. I decided I was going to throw a rock onto that second stretch of ice. So, first throw, well short. Like, not even close. Second throw, I got within a few yards, and then throws 3 through 7, I was like right on the edge. You can't see it, but there was like this little tantalizing piece of ice sticking out right in the center. I was aiming for that because it was closest, and I could not get to it. Throw number 8, I was ready to give up. I do not throw things very often. My shoulder was in a lot of pain. My elbow was in a lot of pain. But I did it. I got the rock to the second level of ice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, that was step 1. Throw some rocks. Step 2. Gather some rocks. Now, y'all might think this is a little nerdy, but I had a great time gathering rocks. And I actually brought some to show you. So, here they are. I'm just going to pass some of them around. So this one is actually the last one I found. It's not even a rock, it's a shell. I didn't know there were shells in the lake. But I found a shell. This was the first rock I found. It's very small, it's the smallest one. It just has like some cool colors on it. I don't know, just thought it was interesting. Now this rock is where things got interesting because I saw it and I thought it was a bird egg. And I thought that I was going to be a hero by rescuing an unborn baby bird. So I picked up what I thought was an egg, and it was just a rock. I don't actually remember why I thought this rock was cool, but it's in my bowl of cool rocks, so you can figure out why it's cool. This rock, I liked the color. It was also very smooth. Just thought it was fun. This rock looked boring on the top. Then I picked it up, and it was all like spicy underneath. That was fun. And then this rock, there was a bunch of like pieces of bark on the shore. And so I wasn't sure if this was a rock or a piece of bark. So I tried to break it, and it didn't break, but I wasn't fully convinced, so I bit it to confirm that it was a rock. And it was indeed a rock. You can't see the bite marks because it's a rock, but I mean, no, you cannot bite the rock, Nathan. But thank you for asking. I appreciate it. So I went exploring for some rocks. I gathered some rocks. And then my hands started getting cold. So I got in the car. And I drove to Press House. And that was the end of my adventure. So, you might be wondering at this point, did you unlock the secrets of this verse? Did you discover what it means to throw and gather stones? And the answer would be no. I still have no clue what the author meant. I'm not really sure if I learned anything particularly insightful, but I do think that I remembered a few things. Now, as an adult, normally, if I pick up a rock and say to myself, I'm going to throw this, there are about 15 fail-safes that kick in my head automatically. Are there any people around? Are there any animals around? Which direction am I throwing the rock? Does there happen to be a house or something breakable in that direction? And most importantly, if I throw this rock, will I hurt myself? The answer to that question is obviously yes, because I did that. But as a kid, none of those fail-safes are there. When a kid picks up a rock and says to themselves, I'm going to throw this, they just throw the rock. They throw it as hard as they can in whatever direction they are facing, and it doesn't matter whether there's a person or an animal or a house or anything else in that direction. They just throw the rock. As I launched rock after rock across the lake. I remember what it's like to be a kid, completely fascinated by the simple act of throwing stones. I remembered what it's like to put my whole body into something I am not good at all, and still have fun doing it. And I remembered things while gathering stones as well. If you've ever had a little kid bring you something they found while they were playing outside, you know that 9 times out of 10, actually it's probably more like 99 times out of 100, the thing they brought you, there's like nothing special about it. It's like, look, a stick! And it's just like a stick, or a leaf, or a rock. But to that kid, that random thing is the most special thing in the world. There is a story attached to it about wonder and possibility. This rock was a dinosaur egg. This leaf looks like my dog. It doesn't, but okay. Anything and everything can become special through the eyes of a child. Gathering stones in Giddings Park, I remembered what it was like to see the world that way. I remembered what it was like to be entranced by something as mundane as a stone, and to believe that others would be just as entranced by it as I was. The world is a lot more beautiful that way, I think. Now, in a letter he wrote to the church in Corinth, the Apostle Paul said this: "When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways." Now, this progression from childishness to adultishness is how most of us are taught that we should grow as people of faith. Even if your spiritual journey starts after childhood, the trajectory is always toward mature faith or adult faith. So faith is supposed to develop from the simplistic, wide-eyed acceptance of a child into the solemn reflection, hearty skepticism, and independent thought of an adult. And to be clear, I do think that there are some things we are supposed to leave behind as we grow in our faith. But I do not believe that spiritual growth is meant to be linear in this way, from childishness to adultishness. Like the rhythms of life and death, breaking and building, weeping and dancing, I think childishness is meant to accompany us even as we spiritually mature. We need that inner child to come with us and remind us to stand on the edge of a lake, to throw and gather stones every once in a while. That naive and clumsy willingness to put one's whole body into an experience. Imagine how much more meaningful our prayers would be if we could pray that way with our whole bodies. Or if our spiritual clumsiness did not make us afraid to try new things. That capacity to find beauty in a random rock. Imagine how much more attuned we would be to God's presence if we cultivated our capacity to see the world in this way. Imagine how much more joy we would have to share with others. So what would it feel like to intentionally decide to do something completely and utterly childish as a spiritual practice? What would it feel like to embody the spirit of a little kid on the edge of a lake, throwing and gathering stones, and say, today, this is how I'm going to pray. This is how I'm going to worship. What would that do for us? Perhaps what we need is another experiment. Amen.